My wife kicked me out of our home on a Tuesday evening in November, and I left without raising my voice. She had changed the locks. There were 2 cardboard boxes sitting on the front walk, my clothes, my shaving kit, a photograph of my parents that she'd had the decency to wrap in a dish towel. The kind of care you show someone you're done with but don't hate. Not yet. What she did not know, what nobody on that quiet 3rd Ward Street could have known, was that folded inside the chest pocket of my Carhartt coat, tucked behind a Fiesta Mart receipt, was a Texas Powerball ticket worth $500 million. I had checked it that morning. I had sat in my truck in that parking lot on Alameda Road for 6 full minutes, staring at those numbers under the kind of fluorescent light that makes everything look a little unreal. And then I drove home to try to save my marriage. I never got the chance to say a word. I picked up both boxes. I picked up my coat last. And I felt the weight of that ticket in the pocket, the same way you feel a secret you've been carrying so long. It starts to feel like part of your body. Before you assume you know where this is going, stay with me. Because this story is not about the money. It never was. It's about what a man hides and why, and what it costs the people he loves most when he never learns to stop. She was still standing in the doorway when I reached my car. I want you to hold that image for a moment, because I have held it for a long time. Rochelle in the doorframe of the house we bought together in 2001, one hand on the door, the porch light catching the side of her face. Not angry, exactly. Past angry. Well, there is a particular kind of stillness a person gets when they have already done their grieving before the conversation happens. And that was the stillness she had that Tuesday evening. The decision was not being made. It had already been made. I was just being informed. I had known something was coming. I want to be honest about that. When you have been married to someone for 23 years, you learn to read the weather, and the weather in that house had been changing for a long time. The silences at dinner had gotten a different quality to them. Not companionable, the way silences can be between people who are comfortable. Deliberate. The kind of silence that is saving something up. She told me she had spoken to an attorney. She told me she needed me to be gone before the week was out, and that she had put out what she thought I would need right away. She said it the way you read a prepared statement. Not cold exactly. Careful. Like she had rehearsed it enough times that the feeling had been worn smooth. I looked at the 2 boxes, clothes on top, folded, my shaving kit in a Ziploc bag, which for some reason is the detail that stays with me, the photograph of my parents from 1974, wrapped in a dish towel. She had been careful with it. That mattered to me, though I could not have told you why at the time. I am a man who spent 26 years as a postal carrier in Houston heat. And before that I watched my father work the port for 3 decades without a single complaint I ever heard. I was not raised to beg, and I was not raised to perform. So I did not argue, I did not raise my voice. I picked up the first box and walked it to my car, a 2019 Chevy Malibu I had paid cash for, and I set it in the trunk. I went back for the second box, then I went back for the coat. The Carhartt had been hanging on the hook by the door since I'd come home that afternoon. Heavy canvas, the colour of dark sand, worn soft at the cuffs from 20 years of use. I bought it in 2003 at a workwear shop on Griggs Road, and I have never found a reason to replace it. I lifted it off the hook and I felt, immediately, the weight in the interior chest pocket. Not heavy, just present. I put the coat on. I did not reach into the pocket. I did not need to. I had already confirmed what was in there that morning. He's sitting in the parking lot of the Fiesta Mart on Alameda Road with the engine running and the radio off. A Texas Powerball ticket folded once around a grocery receipt. $500 million. I had sat with those numbers for 6 full minutes under the parking lot lights before I drove home. Rochelle was still in the doorway. I turned to look at her one time from the end of the front walk. I do not know what I was looking for. Whatever it was, I did not find it. She held the door the way you hold something you are about to close, and so I turned back around and got in the car. The coat sat on the passenger seat. I pulled away from the curb without looking in the rearview mirror. I have thought about why I didn't look, and I think the honest answer is that I already knew what I would see. The porch light, the closed door. And the boxes gone from the walk because she would have brought them back inside before I reached the end of the block. Rochelle was always efficient. I turned left on Ennis, and then I just drove for a while. No destination, just motion. The kind of driving you do when sitting still is not something you can afford yet. Here is what she did not know. Here is what nobody in that neighborhood could have known. I had bought that Powerball ticket on a Monday morning at the Fiesta Mart, the same way I had bought a ticket most Monday mornings for the past 11 years. $2, one play, not out of hope exactly, more out of habit. My mother used to say that a man who never buys a ticket is a man who has already decided God isn't listening. I don't know if I believed that, but I believed her. So I kept buying. And on that Monday morning, something different happened. I checked the ticket Tuesday, the morning Rochelle changed the locks. I want you to understand the sequence of that because the sequence matters. I drove to that Fiesta Mart, sat in the parking lot, scanned the ticket on the lottery app, and watched my phone tell me something I did not immediately trust. I had to read it 4 times. Then I took a photograph of the ticket. Then I locked it in the center console, drove around for a while, and eventually pointed the car toward home. I was going to tell her. I want to be clear about that too. I drove home that afternoon with the intention of walking through that door and telling my wife that our lives had just changed in a way that neither of us had language for yet. That is the truth of it. I never got past the front walk. If you are just finding this channel, please go ahead and hit subscribe before we go any further and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from tonight. Because this story is just getting started, and you are going to want to be here for all of it. My mind went backward the way it always does when I have nowhere immediate to be. Driving west on Elgin, no destination yet, the city sliding past the windows in the particular way Houston does at dusk, that flat orange light settling over everything like it is trying to apologize for the heat. I was not thinking about the ticket. I was thinking about my mother's handwriting. Gloria Battles had the kind of handwriting that belonged in a different century. Small, precise, vertical. She kept her composition notebook on the kitchen counter between the toaster and the wall. And from the time I was old enough to notice things, I understood that notebook was not to be touched. Not because she said so, because of the way she handled it. The way you handle something that is holding everything together. She called it the ledger. Every Sunday evening after church, she would sit at that kitchen table in our house on Tierwester Street in Sunnyside, and she would open it and she would account for the week. What came in, what went out, what was owed, what was saved. She did not discuss it with anyone, including my father. It was not secrecy, it was stewardship. In our house, those two things were never confused. My father James worked the Port of Houston for 31 years, container logistics, overnight shifts, the kind of work that gets done before the city wakes up and never gets mentioned at dinner parties. And he was not a complaining man, he was not a boasting man, he was a man who showed up and did what the day required, and came home and ate whatever my mother had made without commentary. I watched him for 18 years, and I absorbed him the way children absorb things. Not through instruction, but through proximity. Now, when I got my postal carrier position in 1995, I was 24 years old, and I thought I understood what a good life looked like. You worked, you saved. You did not make noise about either one. I carried mail through Sunnyside and Third Ward and South Union for 26 years, and I was good at it, and I was never late, and I never called in unless I was genuinely sick, which happened 3 times in 26 years, and I know that number exactly because I kept a ledger too. I retired at 47 with a postal pension of $2,200 a month and a back that had opinions about cold weather. Rochelle was proud of me that day. I remember that. She came to the small retirement gathering my supervisor put together in the break room on Griggs Road, and she stood next to me, and she was proud. I held on to that image longer than I probably should have in the years that followed, because it became harder to locate as time went on. The bookkeeping started almost by accident. A woman from our church, Sister Evelyn, ran a hair care supply business out of a storefront on Alameda, and she was drowning in receipts and couldn't afford a CPA. I had always had my mother's instinct for numbers. I offered to help on a Saturday. By the following spring I had 3 clients. Mort I charged modest rates because I was still figuring out what I was doing, and I enjoyed the work in the particular way you enjoy something that uses the part of your brain that does not get tired. By 2018, I had 11 clients. By 2021, I had 23, all small businesses, most of them black-owned, most of them in Third Ward and Missouri City and Pearland, a dry cleaner, 2 barbershops, a catering operation, a woman who made custom furniture out of a shop on Old Spanish Trail. I knew their books the way my mother knew her ledger. I charged fair rates, I delivered clean work, and I never missed a deadline. I did not tell Rochelle how much I was making. I want to sit with that for a moment because it is important and it is not simple. It was not that I was hiding it from her, it was that in my family, money was a private thing, and the habit of keeping it private was so deeply installed in me that sharing it felt like the unusual choice, not the other way around. The silence was not strategy. It was architecture. And it was the house I had been built inside of, and I had never once examined the walls. By the fall of 2021, my bookkeeping practice was generating $180,000 a year. I had a savings account at a credit union on Wheeler Avenue that held $340,000. I had been depositing steadily into it for 9 years. I had told Rochelle about none of it, not because I intended to deceive her, but because in my mind the money was not yet a finished thing. When it was ready, I would show her. That was the plan I had made with myself and never spoken out loud. One evening in October of that year, I was in my home office, the small room off the hallway Rochelle called my hobby room, and I pulled up the credit union account on my laptop, $342,000, 4 cents. And I sat there and I thought with genuine intention I should just show her this. I should print this page and walk down the hall and show her. I closed the laptop instead. I have asked myself many times since then what I was waiting for. I think the honest answer is that I did not know. I was waiting the way my father waited, for the right moment, for the completed thing, for something to be fully built before it was shown to anyone. But relationships do not wait for the completed thing. People do not wait. And while I was keeping my counsel, the woman down the hall was making a different set of calculations entirely. That part comes next. The thing about a marriage ending is that it almost never ends the way it looks like it ends. The boxes on the front walk, the changed lock, and the careful voice reading a prepared statement. Those are just the paperwork. The actual ending happened earlier, in smaller moments, in rooms where nothing dramatic occurred, and no one raised their voice. It ended in silences that both people chose, and neither person named. Let me tell you about 3 of those moments. The first one was at New Zion Baptist, a Sunday in September of 2022. Pastor Gaines had just finished his sermon on Deuteronomy, part about bringing your first fruits, and he opened the floor the way he sometimes did for what he called testimonies of provision. Members of the congregation would stand and speak briefly about how God had moved in their financial lives that season. A new job, a paid-off car, a mortgage approved after 3 rejections. The congregation would respond, and there was always warmth in it, a collective exhale of recognition. Rochelle was sitting to my left. I was sitting to her right. I remember the exact configuration because I have replayed it many times. When Pastor Gaines opened the floor, I felt something shift in her posture. Not toward me, away. The kind of small physical adjustment a person makes when they are preemptively distancing themselves from something they expect to be embarrassing. She did not look at me. She looked straight ahead at the pulpit. Her hands were folded in her lap with a precision that told me everything. I had $180,000 a year in bookkeeping income and $340,000 in savings, and I sat in that pew, and I did not stand up, and I did not say a word, and neither did she, and the moment passed. And we drove home afterward and talked about what to have for lunch. I did not tell her that night. I told myself I was waiting for the right time. That is what I told myself. The second moment came 4 months later, in January of 2023. Rochelle's real estate firm had closed out a strong quarter, and her broker, a man named Dwayne, who wore pocket squares to everything, hosted a dinner at a restaurant in River Oaks, the kind of place where the menu has no prices on the side facing the guest. I wore my good suit, the charcoal one I'd had cleaned specifically. I was prepared to have a fine evening. We were seated with 3 other couples. Everyone at that table had a story they were performing, which is different from having a story. One man was a commercial developer. His wife worked in hospital administration. And another couple had recently relocated from Atlanta and were building something in the energy sector, the details of which shifted slightly each time he mentioned it. Rochelle was in her element. She is good in rooms like that. She has a way of making whoever she's talking to feel like the most interesting person present, which is a genuine skill, and I have always admired it. Somewhere in the first hour, the conversation turned to what everyone did. It moved around the table with the easy rhythm of people who have answered this question many times. When it reached us, Rochelle said, without any particular hesitation, that I was between projects, not retired, not a bookkeeper with 23 clients and a 6-figure practice. Between projects, the phrase that people use when the true answer feels insufficient. I picked up my water glass. I took a drink. I set it back down. I did not correct her. I have asked myself many times why I didn't. The honest answer is that by that point I had kept the silence so long that breaking it in that room, at that table, in front of those people, would have required an explanation of why I had kept it, which was a conversation I did not know how to have. So I sat there in my good charcoal suit, and I let the table move on, and I ate the food, and I drove us home, and we did not discuss it. The third moment is the one that still sits with me the most. It was a weeknight in the spring of 2024, late enough that the house was quiet. I was in my office reviewing quarterly summaries for 2 of my Missouri City clients when I heard Rochelle's voice from the hallway, low and easy in the way she only got on certain phone calls. I was not trying to listen. But the house is not large, and the door was not fully closed, and I am a man with good hearing who spent 26 years learning to notice things on a route. What I heard was not an argument. It was not an admission of anything I could name precisely. It was a tone. The particular warmth a person reserves for someone who has been making them feel seen. She said Terence's name twice. She laughed once, quietly, the laugh she used when something landed exactly right. The call lasted 11 minutes. I know because I watched the time on my computer without meaning to. I turned back to my client summaries when I heard her hang up. I heard her walk past the office door. She did not look in, I did not call out, I did not ask her about it that night or any night after, but I processed it the way I processed everything, internally, completely, and alone. This is my flaw. I want to be plain about that. I am not describing Rochelle's behavior to excuse my own. A man who never asks the question he most needs answered has no right to be surprised by the answer he eventually gets. About 2 weeks after that phone call, Rochelle came into the office looking for a pen. I was not there. She opened the desk drawer and then the side drawer, and in the side drawer she found my mother's composition notebook, the one I had been using since Gloria passed, to record my own accounts in the same format, the same small vertical handwriting I had spent years unconsciously learning to imitate. She opened it. I know this because she told me much later, in a different context, with the way people sometimes confess small things when the large things have already been settled. She said she opened it and saw columns of numbers and account references she did not recognize, and she assumed it was old. Something from a previous client. She put it back exactly where she found it. She found a pen in the cup on top of the desk and she left. The ledger was sitting in that drawer with 9 years of financial history, every client, every deposit, every dollar of the $340,000. And she put it back without reading it. She walked out of that office and pulled the door to, and the truth stayed exactly where I had left it, contained, private, invisible, just the way I had kept it. Paulette lives on Tierwester Street, 4 blocks from the house we grew up in. She bought her place in 2003. The same year I bought my Carhartt coat, and she has never once mentioned moving. It is a small house with a deep porch and a kitchen that smells like something is always either cooking or recently finished cooking. When I pulled into her driveway at 8:30 that Tuesday night, her lights were on. They are almost always on. She opened the door before I reached the porch. She looked at me, then at the car, then at the 2 boxes visible through the back window. She stepped aside to let me in without saying a word, and that is Paulette in its entirety. She has never needed a full explanation to know what a situation requires. She had red beans on the stove from earlier. She fixed me a bowl with rice and set it on the kitchen table with a glass of water and a spoon. And she sat down across from me with her own cup of tea, and she did not ask a single question. I ate. She drank her tea. The kitchen clock made the small sound it always makes between the minutes. At some point she got up and fixed me a second bowl without asking if I wanted one, and I ate that too. I have had people in my life who expressed care through words, and I have had people who expressed it through action, and I have always trusted the second kind more. Paulette is the second kind entirely. After a while I said I needed to make a call. She nodded and took her tea into the other room. I sat at that kitchen table where our mother used to keep her ledger, and I pulled out my phone and I called David Mouton. David is an estate and trust attorney with a small practice on Westheimer Road. I had done his books for 3 years. He is careful and thorough and does not perform urgency for its own sake, which is the quality I most value in a professional. I got his voicemail, which I expected at that hour, and I left a message asking him to call me first thing in the morning, that I needed to discuss something time-sensitive related to a financial instrument, and that I would explain in full when we spoke. I kept it to 4 sentences. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. Then I sat there and I let myself think through the options the way my mother used to work through the ledger. Systematically, without sentiment, but not without honesty. I could call Rochelle. I could tell her about the ticket tonight, right now, and watch the conversation change in real time. I considered this for longer than I probably should have, because I am being honest about what I thought that evening. There was a part of me, not a proud part, that understood exactly what that phone call would do, how the temperature would shift, how the boxes would get unpacked. I am a quiet man, but I am not a man without ego, and I want to name that clearly because this story is not worth telling if I only tell the flattering parts. I did not make that call, not because I was strategic, because it was wrong. Using the ticket as a lever to reopen a door that Rochelle had decided to close would not have been reconciliation. It would have been a transaction dressed up as one. My father never did business that way, and my mother's ledger never worked that way, and I was not going to start at 51 years old on the worst night of my life. I could go public immediately, file the claim, take the check, let the news do what news does. That option lasted about 30 seconds before I set it aside. David needed to structure this correctly. A blind trust, proper legal insulation, are the right sequence of steps. My mother kept every receipt. You do not handle something important carelessly just because you are in pain. I could contest the separation, get my own attorney, make it complicated. I thought about this too. Then I thought about what complicated would cost in time and energy and what it would produce at the end of it. And the answer was a version of the same outcome with more damage around the edges. Rochelle had made her decision. I had spent 23 years not saying the things I should have said, and there was no legal filing in the world that addressed that particular problem. What I arrived at, sitting in Paulette's kitchen with a second bowl of red beans inside me and my coat hanging over the chair by the door, was simple enough to fit in one sentence. I would do this right. I would process the ticket correctly privately through David, and I would let whatever happened after that happen at its own pace and in its own time. I would not use the money to argue for something that was already finished. I would not announce it, perform it, or leverage it. I would simply account for it the way my mother accounted for everything and move forward from there. The marriage was over. I knew that sitting in that kitchen the same way I had known it, somewhere below conscious thought, for longer than I wanted to admit. There is a particular kind of grief that is not surprising, and that somehow still arrives with full weight despite the lack of surprise. I sat with it there at that table. I did not try to move through it quickly. My mother used to say that when something costs you something real, and you owe it the dignity of actually feeling the cost, don't rush the ledger, put everything in. Paulette came back in around 10 o'clock and started cleaning up the stove without comment. After a few minutes, she said the couch had clean sheets on it, and there were towels in the hall closet. I thanked her. She waved one hand in the way she does when thanks feel beside the point. I moved the boxes in from the car. I hung the coat over the back of the armchair across from the couch. I lay down with the light still on in the hallway, and I looked at the coat for a long time before I closed my eyes. The ticket was still in the pocket. It would be there in the morning. David would call me back in the morning, and whatever came next would come next, in its proper order, accounted for and handled right. Mind, that is the only kind of man I knew how to be. I had learned it in this neighborhood, in this family, at that kitchen table. I was not going to unlearn it tonight. David Mouton called me back at 7:52 the next morning. I was already awake, sitting at Paulette's kitchen table with coffee, the coat hanging where I'd left it the night before. I told him what I had. I told him the amount. There was a brief silence on his end. Not long, maybe 4 seconds. And then he said, "All right, come in at 10 and we'll do this correctly." That was the whole conversation. David is not a man who performs reaction. His office is on Westheimer, 14th floor of a building that has a fountain in the lobby nobody looks at. We sat across from each other at his conference table for 2.5 hours that Wednesday morning, and he explained the structure he recommended, a revocable blind trust established in Texas with a name that contained nothing connecting it to me. The Gloria Ann Trust, I told him, without planning to say it. He wrote it down without comment. He pulled out the standard lottery claim documents and we went through them section by section. One had brought the ticket in a sealed plastic sleeve I'd found in Paulette's junk drawer. David handled it carefully, noted the serial number, photographed it for the file. He told me the Texas Lottery Commission required claims of this size to go through their Austin office directly. He told me the process would take between 15 and 22 business days for verification and clearance. He told me there would be a mandatory public records disclosure once the claim was verified, regardless of the trust structure, because Texas law required the winner's name to be a matter of public record. I told him I understood. He asked me if there was anyone in my life who needed to be notified before that disclosure became public. I thought about it for longer than he probably expected. Then I said no. He nodded and moved on. The claim was filed that Thursday. The ticket went to Austin by courier, insured and tracked. I went back to Paulette's and continued the work of existing without my own home, which is a stranger feeling than I expected. I kept my client appointments by phone and email. I told the 3 clients who asked that I was doing some work from a different location temporarily and that nothing would be disrupted. Nothing was disrupted. The verification process took 18 business days. Oh, I know because I counted them. During those 18 days, I did not contact Rochelle and she did not contact me, which told me her attorney had advised her to let the silence sit. I found an extended stay motel off E6, 10 near the Galleria, and moved there after the first week because Paulette's couch was fine, but it was Paulette's couch, and I am a man who needs a door that is his own to close. The Texas Lottery Commission confirmed the claim on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-December. David called me while I was reviewing a quarterly summary for a dry cleaning client on Alameda. He said the words slowly and clearly, the way you do when you want there to be no ambiguity about what was just said. I thanked him. He told me the public records disclosure would be processed within 5 business days and that media inquiries typically followed within 48 hours of that. He told me to let any calls from press go to him directly. I said I would. What neither David nor I anticipated was that somewhere in the Commission's administrative files, the contact information on record for Jerome Battles, not the trust, but my original identification filing, still listed Rochelle as my emergency contact. We had filled out that form together years earlier for something unrelated, a beneficiary designation at the credit union, and the information had migrated between systems in the way information does. It was a clerical thread neither of us thought to pull. The Houston Chronicle reporter's name was Marcus Webb. He was a staff journalist who covered municipal and consumer interest stories, and he had found my name through the public records disclosure the same afternoon it posted. He tried my cell phone first. When it went to voicemail, he tried the secondary contact on file. Rochelle answered on the second ring. I know what happened next because she told me about it herself much later, during the one real conversation we had before the attorneys took over completely. I have replayed her account many times, and I believe it is accurate because Rochelle has never been a woman who embellishes. She reports things the way they happened. It is one of the qualities I always respected in her. She was in a model home in a new development in Pearland, the kind of construction where every room smells like fresh paint and ambition. She had clients with her. I'm a young couple, mid-30s, looking at the master suite. Her phone buzzed, and she saw an unfamiliar number with a 713 area code, and she answered it the way you answer unfamiliar numbers when you are in real estate, which is to say, immediately and professionally. The reporter introduced himself. He said he was calling from the Chronicle regarding a Texas lottery claim filed by Jerome Battles, and that he was reaching out to the secondary contact on file to request comment. Rochelle said nothing for a moment. Then she asked him to repeat the name. He repeated it. She asked him what claim. He told her. He gave her the amount. $500 million, verified, filed under a trust, winner identified in public records as Jerome Battles, listed address 3rd Ward, Houston. She told her clients she needed a moment, stepped out of the master suite, walked down the hallway of that empty model home. Turton stood in what was staged as a home office, a desk, a chair, a lamp, a bookcase with decorative spines. And she asked the reporter one more question. She asked him when the ticket had been purchased. He told her the date. It was the Monday before the Tuesday she had changed the locks. There was a silence then that Marcus Webb later described to me, when I eventually spoke with him myself, as the longest pause he had experienced in 11 years of reporting. He said he had not known what it meant at the time. He said it felt significant. She thanked him and ended the call. She called my phone 4 times in the next 8 minutes. I was sitting in the extended stay motel off I-6, 10 when the calls came in. I watched my phone screen light up and go dark, light up and go dark. I knew who it was. I knew what she now knew. And I felt, or in that moment, not triumph, not satisfaction, not even relief. I felt something closer to exhaustion, the particular tiredness that comes when something you have been quietly carrying for a long time is finally, irrevocably visible to everyone. I watched the 4th call end. I picked up my phone and turned it face down on the table and returned to the quarterly summary, open in front of me. The numbers were straightforward. I worked through them to the end. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in May, 6 months and 2 days after Rochelle changed the locks. The settlement meeting lasted 47 minutes. I know because I checked my watch when we sat down and again when we stood up, out of the same habit that makes me check the mileage when I fill the tank. Account for everything, even time. Rochelle and I were on opposite sides of a conference table at her attorney's office on Greenway Plaza. We had not been in the same room since the front walk in November. She looked well. She was dressed the way she always dressed for professional settings, carefully and without excess, and she held herself with the composure that I had always admired in her, even when it made her hard to reach. We did not embrace. We did not have an argument. We exchanged 4 sentences of direct communication across that table, all of them logistical, all of them civil, and none of them the sentences that might have mattered 3 or 4 years earlier when there was still time for sentences to matter. The house in 3rd Ward went to Rochelle, deed transferred free and clear, no mortgage remaining. That was my decision, and I did not negotiate it. I had paid into that house for 23 years, and she had lived in it for 23 years, and it was correct that she keep it. The only item I asked for in return, the one thing my attorney pushed for on my specific instruction, was the home office. Not the room itself, the function of it. I wanted the Gloria Battles Financial Literacy Program to use that space as its first satellite location, operating through New Zion Baptist, accessible to the community we had both lived in for 2 decades. Rochelle's attorney looked at my attorney. My attorney looked at the table. Rochelle looked at me directly, for the first time that morning. She said, quietly and without elaboration, "That was fine. That was the closest we came to a real moment." I nodded. We moved on. I did not see her again after that Thursday. The apartment I chose is in Midtown Houston, on the 4th floor of a building that is 11 years old and makes no attempt to be anything other than what it is. 2 bedrooms, one of which I use as an office. A kitchen with good light in the morning. A parking space that is mine and is clearly marked. I chose it because it was clean and functional, and because every inch of it was a decision I made alone, which felt important at that particular moment in my life. Not a consolation, a construction. There is a difference, and I felt it clearly. I moved in on a Saturday in late May with Paulette's help and a rented truck. By evening the boxes were unpacked, the kitchen was organized, and the Carhartt coat was hanging on the hook by the front door. The ticket has been long processed, the trust long established, the funds long structured into something David is confident will outlast me if I am careful, which I intend to be, but I kept the coat. Some things you keep not because they are useful, but because they are true. That coat was on my back on the worst night of my life, and it held the thing that changed everything. And I was not going to put it in a donation bin because the lining was worn. It hangs by my door the same way my mother's ledger sat on the kitchen counter. Present, accounted for. Now I want to talk to you directly for a moment because this is the part of the story where I think something needs to be said plainly. I am not telling you this story so you will be angry at Rochelle. She made a reasonable decision based on what she knew, and what she knew was incomplete because I made it incomplete. Ed, that is the first thing I want you to hold on to. Silence is not the same as honesty. A man who never lies but never opens the books is still keeping his partner in the dark, and the dark is no place to ask someone to love you from. I cost Rochelle something real. I cost us both something real. The money does not change that arithmetic. The second thing is this. There is a difference between privacy and secrecy, and I spent 23 years confusing them. Privacy is protecting what is yours until you are ready to share it. Secrecy is withholding what belongs to both of you and calling it protection. My mother kept a ledger because money was sacred to her, not because she was hiding it from my father. I took her lesson and applied it wrong. And I want to be honest about that because this story is not useful to anyone if I only tell the flattering version. The third thing is the one I think about most. The character I showed in those weeks after the ejection. The decision not to use the ticket as leverage, the call to David before the call to anyone else, the choice to let the truth surface in its own time without theatre or announcement. The character was not created by the crisis. It was revealed by it. Who you are under pressure is who you already were. The pressure just removes what was covering it. I had been my father's son and my mother's student my whole life. November just made it visible. Before I get to the last of it, I want to ask you something. Have you ever kept a silence that cost you more than the thing you were protecting? Leave that in the comments if you're willing, because I think more people are carrying that particular weight than ever say so out loud. And wherever you are watching this from tonight, drop that in the comments too. This channel is built on people finding these stories at the right moment, and I am grateful for every one of you who stayed with this one to the end. The Gloria Battles Financial Literacy Program held its first session at New Zion Baptist on a Tuesday evening in September. 11 people attended, small business owners, most of them, a couple of young people just starting out. Pastor Gaines introduced me, and I stood up and I said what I had come to say, which was that my mother kept her books in a composition notebook on a kitchen counter in Sunnyside for 30-some years, and that everything I knew about money and dignity and the difference between the two I learned from watching her do it. Then I sat back down and we got to work. I drive back to Midtown afterward. I park in my marked space. I take the elevator to the 4th floor. I unlock my door and I hang my coat on the hook, and I go to the desk in the room I have made into an office, and I open the composition notebook I bought the week I moved in. It is the same kind Gloria used, same black and white cover, same narrow college-ruled lines. I write the date at the top of the first page. I write the opening balance below it. Then I begin the first entry, the same way she taught me without ever teaching me, the same way I have done it my whole life. Everything in, everything accounted for, nothing wasted, not even the pain.